Welcome back to Tip of the Spear with your county commissioners. We have Commissioner Josh Slotnick and I'm Commissioner Juanita Vero. And today we have a special guest with us, our dear Chief Administrative Officer Chris Lounsbury. And
we're going to talk again a bit about taxation and budget, given that that's where we are in terms of our work, and it's this season. And we brought Chris because, not just because Chris knows all about local government, but Chris is especially well informed on these subjects that are kind of arcane and complicated, but don't really need to be. So we brought Chris along so we could break some of this stuff down. So my first question for you is to kind of lead us into this. Most people got a letter who own homes in the recent past saying the Department of Revenue said your house is worth this much money. What does that mean? Because a lot of people looked at that money and said, wait a minute, aren't we in this crazy hot real estate market? I think my house is worth more than that. What's going on there? What does that number mean?
Yeah,
Why is it important for taxes?
Right, so what it is that's the taxable value of the home versus the market value of the home. So the market is what two people would buy and sell the house for. So they're probably right that their house is actually worth more than the number that's shown there. But what DOR does is they look across the homes that are being sold in the general area and then apply a formula to your actual house based on the square footage, how many bathrooms you might have, and those things to figure out how much of that home itself is taxable. Plus, they also take out the value of the land because the land is
super
taxable.
important.
So those two things are different.
How does the taxable value affect how much you pay in taxes?
What it is that taxable value is represented by something we call a mill, which is 1,000th of the total taxable value of the entire county's taxable value. And so what we do is when you get that market value, we, the county and the city and schools and everybody else that you might see on your tax bill, levies a certain number of mills against that taxable value. And then based off of that, that's what you actually pay.
So roughly speaking, just in rough terms, it's going to cost us 5% more to do next year what we did last year.
Right, and our goal, obviously, when we look at the budget, is to try and keep that number as low as possible.
Yeah.
And so we always aim to be below that kind of inflationary rate. And I think this year, while there are some new things that you're considering, what we saw was the base budget growth was related to a large piece of that is inflation and those pressures that are on us as an employer as well.
So you mentioned base budget. Base budget is all the stuff we did last year that we're going to do again. And then we add on to that enhancements or growth, new things, attempts to address new problems.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. The base budget is what we did last year, but the other piece that's part of base budget I think that's important for folks to understand is it's also anything that may have been shifted to local government. So for the example I always use, and not that we would ever want this to change, but Missoula is a growing community, and that means more court cases, for example. So 2 years ago, we got a 5th District Court judge, which was desperately needed in order to be able to address some of those changes. But with that comes a requirement that we provide staff for that judge to the clerk of district court. So that staff had to grow in order to meet that new need. So that becomes part of our base budget because we have to provide that service to make sure that the courts can function. So it's not only the things that we did last year, but other things that we're statutorily now required to do.
so if we're talking about our base budget being estimated, what, 174 million this year? No, sorry, 171 we could get in revenue, but 174 million in expenditures. So talk to us about how we square that.
Sure, you bet. So there's a couple of different things that are in play there, but the biggest one for folks to think about is the fact that some expenses are one-time and some expenses are ongoing. So when we think of ongoing, it's really easy to talk about personnel, so we need to continue to employ the folks that we employed this year to be able to do that. But, for example, if we're replacing a boiler, that's something we're only going to do once every 20 or 30 years. So that's a one-time expense that we're going to have in this year. So we will have cash savings, money that we've been putting aside for years to help replace a boiler or replace if folks have been down to the courthouse roof. So we've been setting aside money to be able to do that, but this year we'll expend that money. So our expenditures will be higher, but the base, the ongoing piece of our budget will match the ongoing revenue because we have to provide a balanced budget when it comes to those ongoing expenses and ongoing.
I was just going to kind of put a fine point on that with those numbers that Juan just threw out, 171, 74. Wait a minute, our budget isn't balanced. It actually is. We're making up that gap. That gap is with money we already have that we're paying for one-time things with. And that distinction between one-time and ongoing is really important. I think that distinction between cash savings and and money that's coming in via property taxes or grants or other things are important too.
Yeah,
So when you mentioned that big revenue total, not all that's property taxes, only a portion of it.
So a portion of it is property taxes, a portion of it comes from the federal government or from the state government, and then a piece of it comes from grant or other revenue sources that aren't directly related to property tax.
There's a small percentage that's fee for services, right? Or is that?
Yeah, there's absolutely a piece that's fee for services. So when you go in and license your dog, for example, at animal control, you pay a fee for that. That fee is designed to help cover the cost of that. And
Can you help us understand the components of the increase to our base budget unique to this year?
Yeah, that's unique to this year. So part of that is our drive towards a $15 an hour entry rate,
Which we've been trying to do for
which we've been
several
which
years.
we got there in this year budget year, and of course that has a cost that comes for it, raising those entry rates to be able to address that. That's one portion of what's driving that. Another piece that's driving that, of course, that everybody's seeing is medical cost increases. That was about a 3% increase. Cost to the Missoula County employees, and again, 80% of our budget roughly is employee costs, and so that makes that a really large number. When you think about that, we have about 855 FTEs, which are full-time equivalents, but about 1,000 people filling those spots because we have lots of part-time employees that work in different positions as well. And then, of course, we've had a slight surge during the time of COVID, but those aren't permanent employees for us. They're just temporary employees that have been able to help us address the health challenge that's going on around that. And then, of course, we have collective bargaining agreements.
Contrary to popular opinion, your Missoula County Commissioners have also said no to $2.6 million in asks. And I guess this isn't because these asks are frivolous or they're not important. It's just, it was a difficult decision to make.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, you hear from all of your departments, there are 30 departments in Missoula County, what are the needs they need to meet the requests that they receive from the citizens that they serve, right? That we all serve when we're working at Missoula County. And what they do is they do their best effort to put those things before you and say, you know, these are the needs across that we're hearing across there. And then one of your functions is to weigh those needs and then determine what we can afford to do and what we can't. And I will say, from sitting there with you in many of those budget meetings, I know it is an agonizing process to have to weigh some of those needs because they are all valid and genuine needs. It's not that anybody's out there looking to pad their budget. They're coming to you with real needs that their department's experiencing in meeting their mission to serve the public in whatever their capacity, whether it's the county attorney's office or roads.
We asked our departments to think big and be expansive. How could you best solve the problems you're facing and deliver the services that are your responsibility to deliver? And people gave us that information, and then we have to look really carefully at that. And as Juan described, figure out what can we get by with this year, how can we pace these things out over time, are there other ways to solve the issues that they brought to us. So it was really worthwhile, not just as an exercise, but educationally, so we all know what's going on. And I think worthwhile for departments so they could really start looking at big picture in their worlds. How could we best move our enterprise forward? You mentioned your tax bill. One thing you can do is go to Missoula County Property Tax Information System, and you can type in your address and you can look at a pie chart of your taxes and see what slice of the pie and size of that slice goes to what part of county government. So you can literally look it up and say, oh, I spent $22 on open space and I spent $5 on the fair and $8 on the sheriff's office or whichever. But it can be really helpful, and you can ask yourself, did I get that level of value?
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.